They called him the last king of Scotland, but his kingdom was Uganda, a man who rose from a cook's uniform to command an entire nation, feared by the world, worshipped by some, and condemned by history. Over 8 years, between 100,000 and 500,000 people would disappear under his rule. Yet when he died in exile, thousands mourned him as a hero. This is the story of Idi Amin, the soldier who became a king, and the king who became a monster. Or was he something else entirely? The year is 1925. In a small village in northwestern Uganda, near the town of Koboko, a boy is born into a world most of us cannot imagine. His name is Idi Amin Dada. His mother, Asa Ate, is a Kakwa woman, a member of a small ethnic group straddling the borders of Uganda, Sudan, and Congo. His father abandons the family when Idi is young, leaving his mother to raise him alone. Asa Ate is not educated. She survives by selling vegetables in local markets, reading fortunes, and practicing traditional medicine. Some say she dabbles in witchcraft, a claim that will follow her son throughout his life. Young Idi grows up in poverty, with little formal education. He attends a local Islamic school for only 4 years. By the age of 10, he can barely read or write in any language. But Idi Amin is not like other boys. Standing nearly 6 feet tall by his teenage years, he possesses an imposing physical presence. His strength is legendary in his village. He works as a goat herder, then as an assistant cook for the British colonial army, the King's African Rifles. It is 1946. World War II has ended, and the British Empire still stretches across the globe. In Uganda, a British protectorate since 1894, the colonial administration needs local soldiers to maintain order. Idi Amin joins the King's African Rifles as a recruit. He is 21 years old. The British officers notice something unusual about this hulking recruit from Koboko. Despite his lack of education, Amin is a natural soldier. He follows orders without question. He is strong, fearless, and unusually skilled in hand-to-hand combat. Within months, he becomes a favorite among his British commanders. In 1947, Amin is deployed to Kenya to fight against the Mau Mau uprising, a violent rebellion against British colonial rule. The Mau Mau fighters are brutal, and the British response is equally savage. Thousands die on both sides. Amin serves in reconnaissance units, tracking rebels through the forests and mountains. His methods are ruthless. Captured Mau Mau fighters rarely survive interrogation. British officers describe him as efficient and loyal. One commander writes in a report, "Amin is a splendid type and a good rugby player, but virtually bone from the neck up and needs a sharp eye kept on him." That last phrase, "needs a sharp eye kept on him," will prove prophetic. By 1959, Amin has risen to the rank of Effendi, a warrant officer, the highest rank a black African can achieve in the colonial army. But whispers of his brutality are spreading. In northern Uganda, during operations against cattle raiders from the Karamojong tribe, Amin is accused of summary executions and torture. A British investigation is launched. The details are horrifying. Villages burned, men buried alive, prisoners beaten to death with rifle butts. But before the investigation can conclude, something changes. Uganda is on the brink of independence. The British are preparing to leave. Amin's case is quietly dropped. What the British don't realize is that they've just trained the man who will become one of Africa's most feared dictators. On October 9, 1962, Uganda gains independence from Britain. A young, charismatic politician named Milton Obote becomes prime minister. Obote is educated, articulate, and ambitious. He envisions a modern, socialist Uganda free from tribal divisions. But there's a problem. Uganda is not one nation. It is a patchwork of kingdoms and ethnic groups, each with its own history and grievances. The most powerful of these kingdoms is Buganda, home to the Baganda people and their king, the Kabaka. When independence comes, a compromise is reached. Obote becomes prime minister, while the Kabaka becomes a ceremonial president. It is an uneasy arrangement, and everyone knows it cannot last. Idi Amin, now a commissioned lieutenant in the new Ugandan army, watches these political maneuvers with interest. Obote recognizes Amin's loyalty and his ruthless efficiency. In 1964, Obote promotes him to deputy commander of the army. 2 years later, Amin becomes full commander, the highest military position in Uganda. Amin has no formal military education beyond what the British taught him. He has never attended a military academy. He is barely literate, but he commands absolute loyalty from his soldiers, particularly those from his own ethnic group and from the Muslim North. He is generous to his men, sharing money and privileges. They would die for him. But beneath the jovial exterior, Amin is known for his loud laugh and love of music. Something darker is brewing. In 1966, a political crisis erupts. Obote is accused of allowing Amin to smuggle gold and ivory from the Congo, where Uganda has been supporting a rebel movement. The Buganda parliament demands an investigation. The Kabaka, sensing an opportunity to weaken Obote, sides with the accusers. Obote's response is swift and brutal. He suspends the constitution, arrests several ministers, and orders Amin to attack the Kabaka's palace with the army. On May 24, 1966, tanks roll through Kampala. Soldiers storm the palace grounds. The Kabaka's guards, armed only with ceremonial weapons, are slaughtered. The palace is set ablaze. The Kabaka escapes through a secret tunnel and flees to Britain, where he will die in exile 3 years later. Obote abolishes the kingdoms and declares himself president. Uganda's traditional monarchies, some of which stretch back centuries, are erased overnight. Idi Amin commanded the assault. His loyalty to Obote seems absolute. But in the smoking ruins of the Kabaka's palace, a seed is planted. Amin has learned a valuable lesson. In Uganda, power comes from the barrel of a gun, and he has just demonstrated that he controls the guns. By 1970, the relationship between Milton Obote and Idi Amin is fraying. Obote has begun to fear the monster he helped create. Amin is too popular with the army, too independent, too dangerous. Reports reach Obote that Amin is embezzling military funds and building a personal fortune through smuggling operations. Obote makes a fatal mistake. Instead of confronting Amin directly, he tries to undermine him. He promotes officers from his own ethnic group, the Langi, to positions of power within the military. He begins transferring Amin's loyalists to remote postings. He even considers having Amin arrested. Amin knows what's coming. His intelligence network, built through years of cultivating informants and paying off subordinates, is extensive. He knows that Obote is planning to move against him. He knows he has only one option. He must strike first. Milton Obote boards a plane to Singapore. He is attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, confident that he has isolated Amin enough to safely leave the country. He has instructed his chief of staff, Brigadier Suleiman Hussein, to arrest Amin while he's away. But Suleiman Hussein is Amin's cousin. On the night of January 24, 1971, unusual activity is reported at military barracks across Uganda. Trucks are moving. Soldiers are loading weapons. Radio communications are jammed. By dawn on January 25th, Amin's forces control every strategic point in Kampala: the airport, the radio station, government buildings, the armory. There is surprisingly little bloodshed. Most soldiers simply follow orders. Those who resist are overwhelmed. By midday, Idi Amin appears on Radio Uganda and announces that he has seized power to prevent Obote from establishing a dictatorship. He promises free elections, an end to corruption, and a return to democracy. The crowds in Kampala erupt in celebration. People dance in the streets. Students cheer. Business owners open champagne. To most Ugandans, Obote was a corrupt tyrant who had destroyed their kingdoms and imposed socialist policies that wrecked the economy. Amin is seen as a liberator. Even the international community welcomes the coup. Britain sends congratulations. Israel, which has been training Ugandan forces, expresses support. The United States views Amin as preferable to the socialist Obote. The British High Commissioner cables London. Amin is a splendid type and very pro-British. What none of them realize is that they've just witnessed the beginning of one of the 20th century's most brutal regimes. But the celebrations won't last long. Within weeks, the true nature of Amin's coup becomes clear. Soldiers loyal to Obote begin to disappear. Officers from the Langi and Acholi ethnic groups, Obote's people, are arrested on suspicion of plotting a counter-coup. They are taken to military barracks, where they are never seen again. In March 1971, troops stormed the barracks at Mbarara, where the 4th Battalion, composed largely of Langi and Acholi soldiers, is stationed. Eyewitnesses report hearing machine gun fire throughout the night. By morning, hundreds of soldiers are dead. Their bodies are loaded onto trucks and dumped into the Nile or buried in mass graves. This pattern repeats across Uganda. Soldiers are ordered to report to headquarters, then executed. Entire units are massacred. The exact death toll will never be known, but estimates suggest that between 5,000 and 10,000 soldiers were killed in the first 6 months of Amin's rule. The purges are not limited to the military. Obote's former ministers, civil servants, and supporters are hunted down. Some flee to Tanzania, where Obote has taken refuge. Others are not so lucky. The torture chambers of Amin's security services, particularly the dreaded State Research Bureau, begin operating at full capacity. One method becomes Amin's signature, the sledgehammer. Victims are forced to kill each other with sledgehammers while soldiers watch. Those who refuse are killed themselves. The cruelty serves a purpose. It creates terror so complete that opposition becomes unthinkable. Yet publicly, Amin maintains his jovial image. He grants interviews to foreign journalists, laughing and joking. He plays the accordion at state functions. He swims in the Nile and challenges boxing champions to exhibition matches. He is 6'4", weighing nearly 300 pounds and remains remarkably athletic. The world sees a buffoon, Uganda sees a butcher. But what they're both beginning to understand is that Idi Amin is something far more complex and far more dangerous. In 1972, Amin begins to transform his public image. He is no longer simply a military president. He is something grander, something almost mythical. He awards himself new titles. His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Hadji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa, in general and Uganda in particular. The titles are absurd, but they serve a purpose. They create an aura of invincibility. They make Amin seem larger than life, too powerful to challenge, too connected to divine authority to question. He surrounds himself with the trappings of royalty. He wears elaborate military uniforms covered in medals, many of which he has awarded himself. He travels in motorcades of dozens of vehicles. He builds lavish palaces and acquires a fleet of luxury cars. He takes multiple wives and fathers dozens of children. Most significantly, he begins to style himself as the last king of Scotland, a title popularized years later by a novel and film, but one that captures how Amin saw himself. He claims Scottish heritage through his supposed grandfather, a Scottish soldier in the colonial army. The claim was almost certainly false, but Amin embraced it. He wore kilts at state functions. He declared himself the protector of Scotland and offered to send Ugandan troops to help liberate Scotland from England. The Scottish connection was part joke, part propaganda, and part delusion. But it revealed something crucial about Amin's psychology. He needed to be more than a soldier who sees power. He needed to be royalty. He needed to be a king. And in Uganda, for a brief and terrible moment, he was. On August 4, 1972, Idi Amin appears on Radio Uganda with an announcement that will shock the world. He has received a message from God in a dream, he says. God has instructed him to expel all Asians from Uganda. They have 90 days to leave. The Asian community in Uganda numbers approximately 80,000 people. Most are descendants of Indian and Pakistani workers brought by the British to build the railway. Over decades, they have built businesses, opened shops, and become the backbone of Uganda's economy. They run factories, import goods, manage banks, and control much of the retail trade. Amin accuses them of economic sabotage, of exploiting Ugandans, of refusing to integrate, but the real reason is simpler. They are wealthy, and Amin wants their wealth. The expulsion is the largest theft in Ugandan history. As the 90-day deadline approaches, panic spreads through the Asian community. British passport holders about 27,000 people, are evacuated to the UK. The rest scramble for visas to India, Pakistan, Canada, anywhere that will take them. They are allowed to take only what they can carry. Bank accounts are frozen, businesses are seized, homes are confiscated. Amin supporters cheer. Finally, they say, Uganda's wealth will belong to Ugandans. Amin distributes the seized businesses to his loyalists, military officers, government officials, tribal leaders. It is patronage on a massive scale, designed to bind the elite to his regime. But the aftermath is catastrophic. The new owners have no experience running businesses. Factories close. Shops run out of goods. The supply chain collapses. Within months, Uganda's economy is in freefall. Inflation skyrockets. Basic goods become scarce. The prosperity of the early independence years evaporates. The Asian expulsion makes Amin a hero across much of Africa. Here, finally, is an African leader willing to stand up to the imperial economic order, to take back wealth stolen by foreigners. Tanzania's Julius Nyerere condemns the expulsion. So does the Organization of African Unity. But many ordinary Africans privately applaud. The expulsion also marks a turning point in Amin's international reputation. Until now, he has been seen as eccentric but manageable. Now he is recognized as a dangerous radical. Western nations condemn him. Investment dries up. Uganda becomes an international pariah. But Amin doesn't care. He has new allies now. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi embraces him. The Soviet Union begins supplying weapons. Palestinian liberation organizations train his security forces. Amin converts fully to Islam. He was raised Muslim but had been nominally secular, and positions himself as a champion of the Arab world. The transformation is complete. The jovial former British sergeant has become an anti-colonial revolutionary, an Islamic warrior, and a self-proclaimed king. But beneath the titles and the rhetoric, the killing continues. To understand Amin's Uganda, you must understand the State Research Bureau. Established in 1971 and headquartered in a former colonial mansion in Nakasero, a wealthy Kampala suburb, the Bureau is officially an intelligence agency. In reality, it is a death squad. The Bureau is commanded by some of Amin's most loyal officers. They operate with absolute impunity. They can arrest anyone at any time, for any reason. There are no warrants, no trials, no appeals. Those taken to the Bureau's headquarters rarely leave alive. The methods employed are medieval in their cruelty. Beatings with iron bars, electric shocks, mutilation. Victims are forced to drink their own blood. Some are thrown into rooms filled with previous victims' bodies and left to die slowly. Others are fed to crocodiles in the Nile. But the State Research Bureau is only one of several competing security agencies. Amin deliberately creates a system where different organizations overlap and compete. The military police, the public safety unit, the presidential guard. They spy on each other as much as on the public. Trust is impossible. Paranoia is universal. The victims come from every sector of society. Suspected Obote supporters, ethnic Langi and Akoli, Christians who speak against the government, Muslims who aren't loyal enough, intellectuals, journalists, judges, doctors, teachers, anyone who might pose a threat, anyone who has something worth stealing, anyone who catches the wrong person's attention. In February 1977, Archbishop Janani Luwum, the head of the Anglican Church in Uganda, is summoned to a meeting with Amin. Luwum has been speaking out against the killings. He has delivered sermons calling for justice. He is beloved by millions of Ugandans. After the meeting, the government announces that Archbishop Luwum died in a car accident while trying to escape, but witnesses report hearing gunshots. Luwum's body, when recovered by his family, shows bullet wounds. The murder of such a prominent religious leader sends shockwaves through Uganda and the world. The Archbishop's death illustrates a crucial aspect of Amin's rule. No one is safe. If a beloved Archbishop can be murdered, then anyone can be. The terror is random and absolute. It paralyzes resistance. Yet even as the bodies pile up, Amin maintains his public persona. He jokes with journalists. He dances at state functions. He sends congratulatory telegrams to Queen Elizabeth, offering to help solve Britain's economic problems. He challenges Muhammad Ali to a boxing match. The contradictions are dizzying. Is this man insane? Is he playing an elaborate game? Or is he simply so divorced from normal morality that he can order a massacre in the morning and play the accordion in the afternoon? The answer, perhaps, is all three. Idi Amin's relationship with the international community is unlike anything seen before or since. He seems to delight in provoking and humiliating foreign powers, yet he also desperately craves their recognition and respect. In 1972, after Britain criticizes the Asian expulsion, Amin sends a telegram to Queen Elizabeth offering to send her food and medicine to help struggling Britons. He announces plans to visit Scotland to claim his ancestral homeland. He suggests that he should be awarded the Victoria Cross for his service to the British Empire. When Tanzania's President Nyerere condemns his human rights abuses, Amin responds by declaring himself King of Scotland and offering to help liberate Scotland from English oppression. He names a street in Kampala Tartan Drive. His treatment of foreign diplomats oscillates between the comical and the terrifying. He forces British citizens in Uganda to carry him on a throne and swear loyalty. He orders Western ambassadors to attend bizarre ceremonies where they must bow and repeat loyalty oaths. Those who refuse face expulsion or worse. Yet Amin is also desperate for legitimacy. He attends the 1975 summit of the Organization of African Unity in Kampala, hoping to showcase Uganda's development. He spends millions Uganda doesn't have building a massive conference center. The summit is a disaster. Several African leaders boycott in protest of Amin's human rights record. His relationship with Israel is particularly revealing. In the early years, Israel is one of Uganda's closest allies, providing military training and development aid. But after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Amin abruptly switches sides. He expels all Israeli advisors, embraces Libya and the PLO, and begins praising Hitler for killing Jews. The shift is partly pragmatic. Arab nations have oil money, and Uganda desperately needs cash. But it also reflects Amin's growing megalomania. He sees himself as a warrior in a global struggle against imperialism and Zionism. He doesn't just want power in Uganda. He wants to be recognized as a world leader. In July 1976, that ambition leads to one of the most dramatic episodes of his reign. Palestinian and German terrorists hijack an Air France plane and fly it to Entebbe Airport in Uganda. They separate Jewish and Israeli passengers from the others, threatening to kill them unless Israel releases Palestinian prisoners. Amin welcomes the hijackers and provides them with support. He visits the hostages, assuring them they will be safe. For a week, the world watches as negotiations drag on. Then on July 4, 1976, Israeli commandos launch a daring midnight raid. They fly over 2,000 miles, land at Entebbe, storm the airport, kill the hijackers and several Ugandan soldiers, and rescue the hostages. The entire operation takes less than an hour. For Amin, Entebbe is a humiliation. Israeli forces operated with impunity inside Uganda. His military was exposed as incompetent. His international reputation, already terrible, plummets further. In retaliation, he orders the murder of Dora Bloch, a 75-year-old hostage who had been taken to a Kampala hospital and left behind during the rescue. Her body is never found. The Entebbe raid marks a turning point. Until now, Amin has been seen as dangerous but manageable. After Entebbe, he is seen as both dangerous and weak. His enemies sense an opportunity, but Amin still has one card left to play. If you're still here, you clearly love deep history stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from Africa and beyond. By 1977, Uganda's economy is in ruins. The expulsion of the Asian community has destroyed the commercial infrastructure. Government-owned businesses are hemorrhaging money. Corruption is endemic. Every transaction requires bribes. Every official has a handout. Amin's solution is to print more money. Inflation spirals out of control. The Ugandan shilling, once relatively stable, becomes worthless. Basic goods disappear from store shelves. Fuel is rationed. Electricity is unreliable. Hospitals run out of medicine. Schools close. The educated class flees. Doctors, engineers, teachers, anyone with skills and the means to leave, crosses the border into Kenya or Tanzania. Uganda is bleeding talent and capital. The nation that was once the Pearl of Africa, as Churchill called it, is becoming a failed state. Amin's response is to blame foreign saboteurs. He accuses Britain of economic warfare. He claims that Obote supporters are hoarding goods. He announces campaigns to root out corruption, even as his own officials steal millions. To maintain loyalty, Amin prints even more money and distributes it to his supporters. Military officers receive new cars, houses, and foreign bank accounts. Tribal leaders get cash payments. Anyone important enough to threaten his rule is bought off. But the patronage system requires constant resources, and Uganda's resources are running dry. Coffee, the nation's main export, still generates revenue, but much of it is siphoned off by smugglers and corrupt officials. Foreign aid has dried up. The oil money from Libya can only stretch so far. As the economy implodes, Amin becomes increasingly erratic. He announces wild schemes. Uganda will build its own car factory, its own airline, its own weapons industry. None of these materialize. He gives rambling speeches that last for hours. He makes bizarre pronouncements, declaring economic war on Tanzania, offering to mediate the Northern Ireland conflict, proposing marriage to Queen Elizabeth. His paranoia deepens. He sees traitors everywhere. The purges intensify. Anyone in his inner circle could be arrested on suspicion of plotting against him. Cabinet ministers disappear. Military commanders are executed. Even Amin's closest associates live in constant fear. One of his wives, Idi Amin, dies in 1974 under mysterious circumstances. The official story is a botched abortion, but whispers spread that Amin had her dismembered after discovering an affair. Her body is reportedly displayed in a morgue as a warning to others. True or not, the story captures something essential about Amin's rule by this point. Truth and rumor have merged. The reality is so horrific that the most outlandish stories seem plausible. From 1971 to 1979, the exact number of people killed under Amin's regime will never be known. Mass graves are discovered for years after his fall. Bodies float down the Nile. Forests and swamps hide countless corpses. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 100,000. Other estimates range as high as 500,000. In a nation of roughly 12 million people, that means 1 in 24 to 1 in 120 Ugandans was killed by their own government. The victims include thousands of soldiers from the Langi and Acholi ethnic groups, massacred in the first months of Amin's rule. Members of the Asian community who couldn't or wouldn't leave, Christian clergy who spoke against the regime, journalists who reported the truth, judges who tried to uphold the law, university professors and students, doctors and nurses, business owners whose assets Amin wanted. Anyone from the wrong ethnic group, the wrong religion, or the wrong political background. People who simply knew too much or were in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of the most chilling aspects of Amin's terror is its randomness. There is no consistent pattern to the killings. You can be arrested for being too educated or too poor, for being too influential or too invisible. Survival becomes a lottery. Entire families disappear. Children are orphaned by the thousands. Women are widowed. Communities are decimated. The social fabric of Uganda is torn apart. Yet through it all, some Ugandans genuinely support Amin. To his supporters, primarily from his own ethnic group in the Muslim North, he is a hero who stood up to the British, expelled the exploitative Asians, and gave Ugandans control of their country. They overlook or rationalize the killings as necessary to protect the revolution. This support, though it's a minority, is crucial. It gives Amin legitimacy in some quarters. It allows him to present himself as a nationalist rather than a tyrant. It complicates the historical narrative. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Idi Amin was not universally hated in Uganda. He was feared, yes, but he was also by some loved. In October 1978, Idi Amin makes a catastrophic miscalculation. Ugandan troops cross the border into Tanzania and occupy the Kagera salient, a small triangle of land along the border. The invasion is partly about settling old scores with President Julius Nyerere, who has been hosting Obote and other Ugandan exiles. But it's also about distraction. Amin needs a foreign enemy to unite Ugandans and deflect attention from the collapsing economy. Nyerere responds with measured fury. Tanzania is not a military powerhouse, but it has a disciplined army and a functioning government. More importantly, Nyerere is widely respected across Africa and internationally. He immediately frames the conflict not as a border dispute, but as an existential struggle against tyranny. Amin, emboldened by early success, declares he has annexed Kagera. He renames it Amin Province. He boasts that his troops will march to Nairobi. He challenges Nyerere to personal combat, a boxing match to settle the war. But Tanzanian forces regroup. With support from Ugandan exiles, including remnants of Obote's supporters and other opposition groups, they launch a counteroffensive. By January 1979, Tanzanian troops and Ugandan rebels have crossed back into Uganda. Amin's military, hollowed out by years of purges and corruption, begins to crumble. The most competent officers were killed or exiled long ago. Those who remain are either incompetent loyalists or terrified conscripts. Equipment doesn't work, supplies don't arrive, communication breaks down. Amin calls on Libya for help. Gaddafi sends a few thousand troops, but they're poorly equipped and unfamiliar with the terrain. They make little difference. Amin appeals to the Organization of African Unity, but his reputation is too tarnished. No one comes to his aid. As Tanzanian forces advance, the brutality intensifies. Amin's troops commit massacres in towns suspected of supporting the rebels. Entire villages are burned, but the tide has turned. Town after town falls to the advancing army. By March 1979, Tanzanian forces are approaching Kampala. Amin makes desperate radio broadcasts calling on Ugandans to defend their capital. But there is no defense. His soldiers are deserting. His ministers are fleeing. His elaborate security apparatus is collapsing. On April 11, 1979, Tanzanian troops enter Kampala. They meet surprisingly little resistance. Amin's presidential guard has melted away. The State Research Bureau headquarters is abandoned. Ugandans emerge from hiding, cautiously at first, then in celebration. Idi Amin is gone. After 8 years, 1 month, and 17 days, his reign has ended. But where's the man himself? As Tanzanian troops close in, Idi Amin flees north. He travels with a small convoy of loyalists, carrying whatever wealth he can transport: gold, cash, jewelry. Some reports suggest he takes several of his wives and children. Others say he travels alone. He reaches the Sudanese border and crosses into exile. Sudan, under Gafar Nimeri, gives him temporary refuge. But Amin is a liability now. The Sudanese government doesn't want him stirring up trouble. After a few months, they quietly ask him to leave. Amin flies to Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi receives him as a fellow revolutionary. But Gaddafi, too, finds Amin inconvenient. He provides housing and a stipend, but makes it clear Amin is not to engage in politics. Finally, in 1980, Amin settles in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government, perhaps seeing an opportunity to demonstrate Islamic solidarity, offers him asylum. They provide a villa in the exclusive Al Ruwais district. He will live there for the next 23 years. In exile, Amin lives comfortably but quietly. The Saudi government monitors him closely. He is not allowed to give interviews or make political statements. He spends his days reading the Quran, swimming, and fishing. He maintains contact with some of his family but is largely isolated from the world. He follows news from Uganda obsessively. Milton Obote returns to power in 1980, sparking a new civil war. When Obote is overthrown again in 1985, Amin reportedly celebrates. When Yoweri Museveni takes power in 1986 and begins rebuilding Uganda, Amin makes occasional statements expressing his desire to return. He never does. Several times over the years, he announces plans to go back to Uganda. Each time, the Ugandan government makes clear he will be arrested and tried for crimes against humanity if he sets foot in the country. In his final years, Amin's health deteriorates. He suffers from hypertension and kidney disease. On August 16, 2003, he dies in Jeddah at the age of 78. His body is buried in Saudi Arabia. His family asked the Ugandan government for permission to bury him in his homeland. The request is denied. In the aftermath of Amin's fall, Uganda begins to confront the horror of what happened. Mass graves are discovered across the country. The State Research Bureau headquarters is open to the public, revealing torture chambers and piles of personal belongings from victims. Investigators try to document the crimes, but records were destroyed or never existed. Many perpetrators fled or were killed in the chaos. Witnesses are traumatized and afraid to speak. The exact scale of the atrocities may never be fully known. Milton Obote's second regime, from 1980 to 1985, is marked by renewed conflict and human rights abuses. Some estimates suggest that as many people died under Obote's second term as under Amin. The cycle of violence continues. It isn't until Yoweri Museveni takes power in 1986 that Uganda begins to stabilize. Museveni, still in power today, has overseen Uganda's reconstruction. The economy has recovered, infrastructure has been rebuilt, the population has tripled, but the scars remain. Entire generations grew up under Amin's terror. Families were destroyed. Trust in institutions was obliterated. The trauma echoes through Ugandan society even now, more than 4 decades after Amin's fall. Legally, there has been no formal reckoning. Amin died in exile, never tried for his crimes. Most of his key associates escaped justice. Some fled abroad. Others were killed in the turmoil that followed his fall. A few were tried in absentia, but never apprehended. This lack of accountability haunts Uganda. Victims' families never receive justice. The historical record remains incomplete, and without accountability, the risk of history repeating remains. Ask a dozen Ugandans about Idi Amin, and you'll get a dozen different answers. To most, he is a monster, a brutal dictator whose regime traumatized the nation. The killings, the torture, the economic devastation, these cannot be forgiven or forgotten. But in some quarters, particularly in the Muslim North and among his own Kakwa people, a different narrative persists. To these supporters, Amin was a nationalist hero who stood up to British imperialism and expelled the economic exploiters. They remember the early days of his rule, when he distributed seized businesses to Africans. They remember his defiance of Western powers, his championing of African independence. This perspective is difficult for outsiders to understand. How can anyone defend a man responsible for so much suffering? But it speaks to something deeper about power, nationalism, and the complexity of historical memory. Amin's expulsion of the Asian community, though economically catastrophic, was genuinely popular among many Ugandans at the time. The perception, fair or not, was that Asians controlled the economy while Africans remained poor in their own country. Amin's action, however brutal and short-sighted, addressed a real grievance. His anti-Western rhetoric resonated across the developing world. In the 1970s, the legacy of colonialism was fresh. Nations across Africa were struggling with the question of how to assert their independence economically and culturally. Amin, whatever his faults, was unapologetically African. He didn't bow to Western pressure. He didn't moderate his language to please foreign powers. This made him a symbol. Not a role model perhaps, but a symbol nonetheless. When Amin died in 2003, thousands of people in Uganda mourned. They held memorial services. They praised his courage. They ignored or minimized the atrocities. Internationally, Amin's legacy is equally complicated. He became a caricature, the mad African dictator, a subject of jokes and films. The 1977 television movie Raid on Entebbe portrayed him as a buffoon. The 2006 film The Last King of Scotland, despite its fictional narrative, cemented certain images of Amin in popular consciousness. But these portrayals often miss the deeper questions. How did Amin rise to power? What systems allowed him to rule for 8 years? Why did the international community support him initially? What responsibility do former colonial powers bear for creating the conditions that produce leaders like Amin? These are uncomfortable questions. They don't have simple answers, but they're necessary if we want to understand not just Idi Amin, but the broader patterns of post-colonial African politics. Idi Amin was not unique. The decades after African independence saw numerous military coups and brutal dictatorships. From Bokassa in the Central African Republic to Mobutu in Zaire, from Mengistu in Ethiopia to Doi in Liberia, the pattern repeated. Charismatic military leader, initial popular support, gradual descent into paranoia and violence, eventual collapse. Why? The reasons are complex, but several factors stand out. First, the colonial powers left behind weak institutions. The military was often the only truly national institution, better organized and more cohesive than civilian government structures. This made military coups both attractive and feasible. Second, Cold War dynamics encouraged instability. Both the Soviet Union and the West supported dictators who aligned with their interests, providing weapons and legitimacy regardless of human rights records. Third, artificial borders created by colonial powers lumped together diverse ethnic groups with different languages, cultures, and historical grievances. Leaders like Amin exploited these divisions, using ethnicity as a tool of control. Fourth, economic structures inherited from colonialism concentrated wealth in the hands of foreign or minority communities. This created resentment that leaders could exploit, as Amin did with the Asian expulsion. None of this excuses Amin's crimes, but it helps explain how he was possible. He wasn't an aberration. He was a product of his time and circumstances. Perhaps the most important voices in assessing Amin's legacy are those who survived, the families who lost loved ones, the people who witnessed atrocities, the children who grew up in fear. Their stories are heartbreaking. A woman whose father was taken by soldiers and never returned. A man who watched friends dragged from a bar and shot in the street. A child who hid in a closet while troops ransacked her home. But there are also stories of resilience, communities that rebuilt, families that held together despite loss, individuals who chose forgiveness over revenge. Uganda today is vastly different from Amin's Uganda. The economy has grown, poverty has decreased, infrastructure has improved. A new generation has been born with no memory of Amin's rule. Yet the trauma lingers. Psychologists who work in Uganda speak of intergenerational trauma, the way fear and suffering get passed down through families. Trust in authority remains fragile. Political violence, while nothing like Amin's era, still occurs. The challenge for Uganda, as for many post-conflict societies, is how to remember without being consumed by the past, how to achieve justice without perpetuating cycles of revenge, how to build a national identity that acknowledges both the horror and the resilience. There have been efforts at reconciliation, public memorials to victims, documentation of atrocities, educational programs teaching young people about this period. These efforts are important, but they're incomplete. What Uganda hasn't had is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like South Africa's, or war crimes trials like those for Rwanda's genocide. Without formal accountability, the wounds remain raw. Families don't know what happened to their loved ones. Perpetrators were never held responsible. The historical record is fragmented. This absence of closure shapes Uganda's present. It influences how people view authority, how they engage with government, how they think about justice. Idi Amin's story is not just about one man or one country. It's a story about power, how it's gained, how it corrupts, and how it ultimately destroys. Amin rose from nothing. He had no formal education, no political connections, no inherited wealth. What he had was physical strength, loyalty to his superiors, and a willingness to use violence without hesitation. In a system where these qualities were valued above all else, he thrived. The British colonial system created Idi Amin. They trained him, promoted him, and overlooked his brutality when it served their purposes. When Uganda gained independence, they left behind a military structure designed for control, not governance. Amin simply used the tools he'd been given. His initial popularity reveals something uncomfortable. Brutal leaders often have genuine support, at least initially. Amin's coup was welcomed by many Ugandans. His expulsion of the Asians was celebrated across much of Africa. His anti-Western rhetoric resonated with millions. This popularity didn't make his actions right, but it complicates our understanding. Dictators don't always impose themselves on unwilling populations. Sometimes they promise what people want to hear: stability, prosperity, national pride, then slowly reveal their true nature. Amin's paranoia and violence escalated gradually. The first purges targeted specific enemies. Then the definition of enemy expanded. Soon, anyone could be a target. This pattern is familiar from countless other regimes. The circle of trust narrows until even the leader's closest allies fear for their lives. The international community's complicity is also instructive. Western nations initially supported Amin because he seemed preferable to the socialist Obote. When his brutality became undeniable, they issued condemnations but took little action. Economic interests, Cold War calculations, and racism all played roles in this inaction. The economic collapse under Amin demonstrates that stealing wealth doesn't create prosperity. The Asian businesses Amin seized were given to people who didn't know how to run them. Within months, they collapsed. Printing money to maintain loyalty created hyperinflation. Corruption became so endemic that basic economic activity became impossible. But perhaps the most important lesson is about institutions. Amin destroyed every check on his power. He purged the military of independent voices. He intimidated the judiciary. He silenced the press. He created competing security agencies that spied on each other, making collective action impossible. Without institutions to constrain him, his worst impulses flourished. And when he finally fell, there was nothing left to rebuild on. Uganda had to start from scratch. Who was Idi Amin, really? After decades of analysis, the question remains elusive. Some psychologists have diagnosed him as a psychopath, someone incapable of empathy, driven by self-interest, skilled at manipulation. The diagnosis fits certain patterns: his charm, his cruelty, his apparent lack of remorse. Others suggest he suffered from late-stage syphilis, which can cause delusions and erratic behavior. This would explain some of his bizarre actions in later years: the rambling speeches, the paranoid accusations, the grandiose titles. Still others argue he was simply a product of his environment, a man trained for violence, rewarded for brutality, and elevated beyond his abilities. In this view, Amin wasn't exceptional. Put almost anyone with his background in the same circumstances, and the result might have been similar. The truth likely incorporates elements of all these explanations. Amin was intelligent enough to seize and hold power for 8 years. He was charismatic enough to maintain loyalty among core supporters. He was strategic enough to play different factions against each other. But he was also profoundly damaged. His childhood was marked by abandonment and poverty. His career was defined by violence. He was functionally illiterate, thrust into a role requiring sophisticated political skills. He was surrounded by sycophants who told him what he wanted to hear. In his final years, in exile in Saudi Arabia, some visitors reported that Amin seemed genuinely baffled by his reputation. He insisted he had done what was necessary to protect Uganda. He claimed his enemies exaggerated his crimes. He maintained that history would vindicate him. This self-deception is perhaps the most chilling aspect of his character. Even at the end, he couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge what he had done. The capacity for self-justification appears to be infinite, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Idi Amin called himself the last king of Scotland, but his real kingdom was Uganda. And what a kingdom it was, built on fear, sustained by violence, and ultimately consumed by its own contradictions. He wanted to be remembered as a liberator, a nationalist, a champion of African independence. Instead, he is remembered as a tyrant, a murderer, and a cautionary tale. He wanted to build a prosperous Uganda free from foreign exploitation. Instead, he destroyed the economy and forced millions into poverty. He wanted to be loved and respected. Instead, he was feared and ultimately abandoned. In the end, Idi Amin was neither the buffoon of Western caricature nor the hero of his own imagination. He was something more mundane and more terrifying, a deeply flawed man given absolute power with predictably catastrophic results. His reign lasted 8 years, 1 month, and 17 days. In that time, between 100,000 and 500,000 people died. Countless others were tortured, displaced, or traumatized. An entire nation was set back decades. Yet Uganda survived. The nation Amin tried to reshape in his image proved more resilient than he imagined. Families rebuilt, communities recovered, the economy eventually stabilized. A new generation was born. This resilience is Amin's real legacy, not the brutality he inflicted, but the strength of the people who endured it. The mass graves are still being discovered. The stories are still being told. The wounds are still healing. But Uganda endures. Idi Amin wanted to be the last king. Instead, he became a reminder of why no one should ever be king at all. Power without accountability, authority without constraint, rule without consent. These are the ingredients not of kingdoms, but of nightmares. On August 16, 2003, when Idi Amin died in his villa in Jeddah, the news spread quickly across Uganda. Some celebrated, others mourned. Most simply remembered the fear, the loss, the years when their nation seemed to have descended into madness. Today, more than 4 decades after his fall, Uganda continues to reckon with his legacy. School children learn about him in history classes. Survivors tell their stories to younger generations. Scholars debate his impact. But perhaps the most important question is not what Idi Amin was, but what he represents. He represents the danger of unchecked power, the tragedy of weak institutions, the cost of international indifference, the complexity of post-colonial politics, the ease with which brutality can be normalized. His story is a warning that resonates far beyond Uganda's borders. In any nation, at any time, the conditions that enabled Amin could emerge again. A charismatic leader promising simple solutions, a population hungry for change, a military willing to follow orders, international powers looking the other way. The defense against such leaders is not military might or economic sanctions. Though these have their place, it is institutions, independent courts, free press, professional military, active civil society. It is accountability, the knowledge that no one, not even the president, is above the law. It is memory, the refusal to forget what happened and why it must never happen again. Idi Amin rose from a cook's assistant to the ruler of a nation. He claimed to be a king, but he was never royalty. He was a soldier, a dictator, and ultimately a cautionary tale. His kingdom has crumbled. His legacy is contested. His name evokes horror, fascination, and debate. But the people of Uganda, the survivors, their children, their grandchildren, they are the true measure of this story. They endured. They rebuilt. They refused to let their nation's identity be defined by its darkest years. That is the real last word on Idi Amin. Not the power he wielded, but the resilience of those who survived him. The last king of Uganda ruled for 8 years. The people of Uganda will endure forever. If you enjoyed this story, like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that shaped history. Let us know in the comments. What lessons from Idi Amin's reign do you think are most relevant today?